Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 101 of Humanity Rising. Since the 22nd of May, Ubiquity University and over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world have come together to create a daily open space so that people globally can come together to share what it's like to navigate through this extraordinary human event, this pandemic that has put most of us under lockdown, all of us into some form of social distancing, and brought the entire world into a single conversation about public health and about the future of humanity as we move our way through a pandemic that doesn't seem to be going away. The United States just hit 200,000 deaths, due largely to a completely incompetent government. So the US finds itself as 4% of the human population experiencing over 20% of all the cases and all the deaths. I happen to be in France, and I want to just share my screen. This is just near my little Airbnb near the Bastille in Paris. And it's been up for about a month. And yesterday I was walking by and I saw a woman gluing some name and statement to the wall. And so I walked over to her and said, what is this? And she says, these are the names of all the women that have been killed due to domestic abuse in the last 6 months. And not just here, but in different parts of Paris, in different cities around France. And then I came back and there was an article in the New York Times, and it was talking about this phenomenon in France called the gluers that has just spontaneously erupted of women that are so concerned about the rise in domestic violence in France that they just started this spontaneous campaign. I looked into it, and I in fact asked her, have you noticed anything about the rise in cases due to the pandemic? And she said, yes, it's now becoming an acute concern. I didn't research that later and find that in many countries around the world, domestic abuse, domestic violence is on the rise. And I think it's worth just pausing on that for a moment, everyone. First, to say that going into lockdown, going into social distancing is not a value neutral compulsion. It's not a value neutral act. It has consequences. Human beings are social animals, and you put us under lockdown, you force us into isolation for months at a time, there are going to be consequences. And one of the consequences, as we saw in the United States and again in other countries around the world, was this rise in racism. How many Black men in the last several months have died at the hands of white police officers? It's happening with such frequency you can barely remember the names. In Kentucky, they've put the state under emergency martial law, waiting for the findings of whether the police that killed Breonna are going to be charged. A young Black woman that was killed in her own home. And there's not certainty that justice will prevail. And now in France, the names of the women who've been killed. And I just wanted to sort of bring these aspects into our conversations today, in part because we're having a dialogue with a philosopher who has an approach, I'm sure, to many of these complexities, but so that we can all just be mindful as we go day by day, choice by choice through this pandemic, that all our acts have consequences. All our acts have consequences. So to start our program today, I'd like to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Sabina van Gafka, who will commence our program. Sabina, well.
Thank you so much, Jim, and a warm welcome to all of our viewers from around the world and also our 40 or more streaming partners. We really are so honored to have you connect with Humanity Rising each and every day, or if you're new to Humanity Rising, because you are also the catalyst and ripples of impact that can also convey these messages in turn, because we really need to shed light on each and every dialogue that we actually have on Humanity Rising. And also, as you, Jim, just highlighted now, that all of the transitions that are also happening within us as individuals, as societies, due to this pandemic, but not only due to the actual dis-ease, but actually the implications it's having on our way of being, living, and seeing the world. And all these veils that are being, taken away so that we can see more clearly of how, what I would say, the soon to be old paradigm or structural way of convening this planet and humanity, and how the transition to a new paradigm and the rising of the consciousness and all the conversations that we are talking about here, that it also happens on an individual level, but it's sparked by us coming into an era of interconnectedness where we gather around a common cause that is painful, hurtful, but that also is transformational and very, very potent. And yesterday was the 100th episode anniversary of Humanity Rising, and applauds to you, Jim, and everyone working with Humanity Rising. I just want to mention that because you, every single day you show up here to really facilitate the space to all these amazing and transformational and knowledgeable speakers, leaders, authors, creatives, everyone that we've had so far. I think it's soon going to be around 600 speakers. And yesterday's conversation, for those of you who weren't part of it, I really do recommend that you view it, because it was a very vital and explanatory dialogue on the concept of green swans. Most of us know the concept of black swans, but this is green swans, that is all about how we really can make sustainable systematic change and transition into the era of exponential progress towards a green and regenerated planet and humanity. And once again, the emphasis that change comes from within, but that not only, I think what was interesting yesterday, and that might also tie into the conversation today, that not only that change happens from within, but in order for us to change a system, we not only need to change it, we need to see it, we need to feel it, and we need to understand that we are the system. We are part of the system. The system isn't outside of us. We are living and breathing the system. And with that, we are also contributing to the system with every action or non-action that we take. And that was sort of one of the takeaways that I had, that we need to understand we are not separate from the system that we are trying to create. We actually are the system. And it also touched upon the necessity to develop that deeper learning capacity, not only as an individual, but as a society. And that's why I also think today can be part of that deeper learning, as we're going to have a session called The One and the Many, where we will be meeting British philosopher Tim Freke, I hope I said your surname correctly, a pioneering philosopher who has best-selling books, inspirational talks, and life-changing events that has touched the hearts of many. And he had his own spiritual awakening, a spontaneous awakening at the age of 12. And he'll be talking together with Peter and Mary on the nature of reality, but also that important fusion of science and spirituality. So before I hand over the space, let's just align and connect with our hearts, connect with the heartbeats of all of us around us, and really open our minds and be present to the here and now. And Richard, if we can have the beautiful chant in the background, that's all. If you want to put your hand on your heart and just inhale and exhale. And let's just feel that space of interconnectedness, that we open a sacred space with an open mind and an open heart. Thank you, Richard, for playing the music. And with that, I hand over the space to today's convener, Peter Mary.
Thank you, Sabina. And thanks, Jim, as well, for the very grounding introduction there. And yeah, it's a great pleasure to welcome Tim to Humanity Rising today. We met, I guess, probably properly first. I heard you, Tim, around at the Fire Temple at Broughton, where you passionately told your story about the nature of how we are indeed so interconnected. And congratulations, by the way, on your Mind, Body, Spirit award for being Writer of the Year. Great, after all those 35 books, great recognition for everything that you've done. So wonderful to have you with us. I thought maybe just as a way of kicking us off, you could just tell us a little bit of your story, of how you've come to where you are now, and then finish off with what are the questions that are really on your mind right now in terms of life, the universe, and everything.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and hello, everyone. Yeah, well, I'm getting older now, so it's a long story. But if I really, as I said in the introduction, it started when I was a kid. For me, it felt like, look, this experience I'm having is incredibly mysterious and feels significant. Why are all the grown-ups pretending they know what's going on when clearly they don't? And why is everyone ignoring the enormity of the mystery of being alive and death and suffering and purpose? And that was really obvious to me. I can't remember a time when it wasn't. Still is every day, actually. And then something happened one day, just sitting on a field, over a hill, actually, overlooking this little sleepy town I was born in. And I experienced what I think of now as this deep awake state, or a spiritual awakening is the way it gets described traditionally, which was lots of qualities, but the one that was most important for me was this sense of communion or oneness, and this enormous love, like the whole universe is pulsating with love. And what happened there was it felt like all my questions disappeared into the love. And that made a massive impression on me. And I went down and carried on being a crazy teenager, but it was like a seed. Like Carl Jung said, often a life has a seed. And that was my seed for sure. And I've spent the rest of my life one way or another working out, how can I get back there? How can I go deeper? What is that? How does that fit into all the other aspects of life where it's not like that? And because it's my nature to communicate, how can I share it with other people? And that's what I've been doing. So where that's led to in the last phase of my life has been writing. And part of that was writing, going through all of the spiritual traditions of the world and going, hang on, underneath here, there's somebody in a different place, in a different time, who's gone, oh, it's all one. And there's this enormous love. And then try to understand it with the vocabulary and the culture they existed in. And each one was moving it on. It was evolving. And so I began to feel like I'm at the end of this huge tradition. And because we live in these unique times where, I mean, when I was younger, I almost became a friar, for instance, because I could run away to a friary. Actually, when I had a massive row with my dad when I was 15, I ran away to a friary, almost became a friar, went back when in my early 20s, almost became a friar. Because that's what was around. When I was young, I went to church because that's what's around. But I came into a culture where everything was available. So suddenly I felt like, oh, this is all my tradition. I'm a human being. They're human beings. I have been given, and I'm at the front end of the whole human spiritual tradition. And this is new. So what do I do with that? And having written books on these traditions and had a big bestseller on Christianity, and I set out then to go, look, the thing I admire about all of these people is that they moved it on. So is there anything, how can I move it on? And what I've been doing really in this last phase is two things. One is, how can I share the actual experience? Because that's the foundation, that so you just get it. So you feel that oneness and that love. And then how can I understand it? And in particular, given the way that our culture has moved now with this incredible thing we call science, which is mind-blowing in what we've now know, is that going to replace spirituality? Or is spirituality got something within it which needs to come into harmony with science? And that's been that's been my everyday endeavor. That's what I wake up in the morning and do all day, is to try and articulate something which can make sense of that.
Great, thank you. And before we go into the science and spirituality question, could you say a bit more about what have you found to be the most effective ways of actually giving people that experience of oneness and love?
Well, I've been meditating all my life, so meditation was the place I started. But what I discovered about 20 years ago, by accident, was that if I connected people, then the oneness just became obvious. So what I started doing was I started working a lot with gazing, which I'd never come across before. I mean, people have been doing it forever, but I'd never come across it. I just it was an accident, and listening. But for instance, I will get a group of people. So you're just sitting with somebody, and then you're just noticing, oh, look, I see your face. It's beautiful. But then, well, you can do it now with me, or I can do it with you, is that the thing I'm connecting with is your psyche. Psyche is just Greek for soul. I'm connecting with your soul, and I can't see it because it doesn't exist in the world, but it's there. And I'm connecting with it as I look in your eyes. And then there's another jump that can happen where you suddenly get, oh, there's one of us, and the universe is looking at itself. And that's when this enormous love opens up. And for 20 years, I've been traveling around the world with people in all sorts of different cultures. And I have found that the vast majority of people can go, poof, and suddenly it ceases to be like an aspiration or a lovely idea. Because when you feel the love, I remember a gentleman saying to me years ago, if I get this, will I know? And my feeling is, yeah, God, you'll know. You can't miss it. The love is it's just every pore in your body. You won't miss this. And that's been, so the connection has been absolutely, and other things too, but above all, that's the place, which is where, I mean, just to preempt maybe, is where I've ended up when you said, what's my feeling is we are evolving. So I'm interested in what you're doing here with Humanity Rising and everything. I think we're in the process of evolving from what I call from individuals into what I call unividuals, which are individuals conscious of unity. with the universe. So everything I'm doing really is about what can we do philosophically? What's the story we can tell, which genuinely makes sense of so much information we now have in culture? And then what is it we can do together to bring about that shift where I look at you and you're different to me and you're not? And that's love. Love is how the oneness feels. I think it's as simple as that.
Lovely. Love is how the oneness feels. We actually did that exercise at Broughton, and we did it in a really cool way. So we had an outer circle and an inner circle, facing each other, and you spent a couple of minutes with one person, and then it moved on. And like you got about 12 of these experiences. And I just remember the feeling of the field in the room afterwards was so charged. It can't be anything other than love. There was just this incredible power, and people couldn't really talk afterwards for a little while, because they were so touched by the experience. But that was really
so strong, isn't it, Peter? And what I love about it also is that part of what I'm interested in the new spirituality is you get away from the special person on the stage. I mean, I've spent my life looking at this. Hopefully I've got something to offer people. I want to do that. But if we're going to see we're one, it's about really seeing it in everyone. And what I love about doing that, when you've got a room full of people and you meet sort of 20 other people in that way, I've done it with more as well, is that afterwards it's not just the guy on the stage or the woman on the stage, it's all of these different people. And some of the times I've done it, there's been old people, young people, different nationalities, different types. Because I'm a philosopher, people come to my events for clear thinking. But because I'm a love junkie, people come to my events for feeling. And because I've written scholarly books, some people expect a lecture, with footnotes. And they all end up in a room together looking in each other's eyes. And that's just like, just sublime, beautiful. I love it. And then you just see everyone just like, come into the body and relax with each other. And suddenly it's magic. Magic.
And you get that deep feeling with each person, I remember, but you also get a unique quality from each person. So again, you get the kind of oneness experience, but you also do get the deep realization of the uniqueness of all the individuals.
And that's another, really, I just noticed, just caught my eye, someone just said, have you done this on Zoom? And I have. Because of COVID, I couldn't go to run my retreat in Japan this year. So we had, with a whole load of Japanese people with translation, we did it on Zoom, and it was fantastic. We had a whole retreat, and it really, so because it's not about, we're connecting now across the world. And what's so great about what's happened is you start realizing, I can connect with you. And when you realize I'm sitting in my room all on my own and feeling this powerful connection with people on the other side of the planet. And the thing you said there is so important. So one of the big transitions that happened for me in my own kind of crazy journey through things was that in trying to understand what this awakening experience is, I naturally went to the deepest traditions. And one of the deepest traditions I found was the non-dual tradition in India, although there's many other ones as well. But the message which kind of comes across with that is it's all one. So get rid of your separate self. It's in the way. In fact, there's a general feeling your humanity, generally, your attachments, your human emotions, your dreams and aspirations, your desires, pleasure, the body itself. There's a kind of a background from the past whereby the world is a kind of prison, it's a trap, and you need to get out. And what I was feeling was, well, that may have been a way of seeing it 2,000 years ago, but right now it doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like, no, this is where it's happening. And the individual doesn't feel like it's in the way. It feels like it's beautiful. Work in progress. There's plenty of I could complain about Tim, for instance. But despite that, the individual's a good thing. So I've been looking for a spirituality which honors that oneness through the individual, not by removing the individual.
Yeah. I think, it's been interesting. I've been having these dialogues with a guy called Nish Dubashia around the Bohm Krishnamurti interactions. And in that, we went into this topic because Krishnamurti sometimes kind of lent into that area of it's all one. And it feels to me what it is it's a confusion between the absolute and the non-dual. Because what we have is we have the absolute and the relative. So the relative, all the stuff going on every day around us. But at the same time, we can have this experience of oneness, right? The absolute. And the thing is that they exist side by side. And what the non-dual is the ability to hold the absolute and the relative side by side at the same time. But what seems to have happened in some traditions is that they've kind of confused the absolute for the non-dual and dismissed the relative.
Yeah, which is a duality, of course.
Which is, of course, the duality.
I get that, Peter. I've kind of moved away from that absolute. I mean, I do understand that, and that's right. And there is a powerful tradition, say in Tibetan Buddhism and so forth, which would see it in those ways. The way that I experience it now, and where it's changed, and with my current work, which works better for me now, is to say, look, it's not all one. It's more interesting than that. It's the one in relationship with itself. That's the nature of existence. That's what it is. Because the trouble with the absolute and the relative, it's still just in the language, it sounds like this is the real absolute reality and they're relatively real. Whereas it feels like, no, this is real. This is it. This is where the one is in relationship with itself. And through every single form, the one is in relationship with itself, including me and you. So we are both Tim and Peter, and we're the one in relationship with itself as Tim and Peter. And that's the jump. The jump is not that the individual is an illusion. It's the individual as if it were separate is an illusion, because the individual is actually the cutting edge of this evolutionary process that we've been in for 14 billion years, through which the one is experiencing itself and relating to itself and thinking about itself and loving itself or not, or just everything. And so suddenly our humanity becomes absolutely key, which is really what we feel. And so we should.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And the way that I've been kind of framing that, particularly in the context of our relationship to the earth and the ecological challenges we've been facing, is anytime I kind of do a talk or things, I'm reminding people, well, this is actually the earth talking to itself. So
yes,
I'm the earth, talking to itself. You're the earth listening to itself. We're the earth trying to work out, how does the earth take this next step? If humanity is the kind of self-awareness function, as it were, or organ of the earth, so we are as an expression of the earth. And that's where it seems to have gone wrong somewhere, that we've forgotten, somehow that we are actually the earth. And then you expand it more and say we're the universe, or we're life, in whichever way that's into. But it's the key is it's about that realization that even though we each have our own uniqueness, we're also connected, and that it's one system kind of thing interacting with itself, basically.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I feel like, as a philosopher, I feel like, look, I'm the universe going, what am I?
Yeah, right.
How do I work? Do I have a purpose? Am I any good? What bits of me are working and which bits of me are not? And that's what I am. It's like, what else could I be? I mean, what else could I be? And because, it's like, what I could exist separately from it? How? And with the earth, it feels the same. One of the things that often worries me about the green movement, or not the green movement, but some aspects of green spirituality, is when I hear people talking about human beings as if they were separate from nature, as if there's nature and we're kind of doing something to it. And it feels like, no, we are nature. That's what we are. All that we've created, or of culture, is a product also of nature. And somehow, but like you said, we are that in this particular conscious form. And what we particularly have is imagination. We've really, the latest thing that's evolved is this ability to experience the world of images and ideas. And that's just exploded exponentially for human beings. And that's our greatest blessing. And it's also our greatest challenge. And that's where we can meet. Well, it's where we're communicating now, isn't it? Now, with our bodies, I mean, my hands do this. I don't know why they have to, but really all the action is taking place in the psyche. That's where we're really connecting.
Yeah, interesting, because that at one level that feels like a transcendent level of connection, and yet there's also when I kind of was playing with this idea of okay, this realization. So we are the earth exploring this with itself. I did an exercise with a group where we sat down and we just went around in a circle, and we first all tried to tune into remembering, putting back together, that we're the earth. We went around and each of us started our sentence with "I, the earth." So as if we were talking like as the earth, because we are. For example, I, the earth, back in 1969, took bits of my body and sent it up into space so I could look back and see myself. And then we went round for maybe half an hour in that space. And the feeling that generated in the room, the field, was, because all of these people have been doing meditation and stuff in the past, it was an experience of unity, but it wasn't a transcendent unity. It was an immanent unity. It was a very grounded, almost pre-cognitive, pre-rational feeling of, whoa, and a deep, deep sense of connection. And people were able to distinguish that feeling between a kind of meditative, let's say, transcendent state.
Yeah, they're different.
It feels like it's that we've had this kind of transcendent evolutionary spirituality that's encouraged us to get out of our bodies and dismiss the body, the emotions, and everything else. Whereas what we really need, if we're going to survive and be able to continue to play and thrive here in this beautiful earth, is a spirituality of immanence that also brings us into our body and connects us at that level as well.
Yeah, completely. I agree with that completely. And these experiences are different. I mean, the idea that there's a spiritual experience is one that I had at one time I've completely abandoned. It's different and different for everyone. And I feel that's important, because a lot of people expect, oh, you've described it like this, Tim. I haven't had it like that. And it's like, well, of course not. That's a Tim experience. You'll have it like you. And you're unique. That's the whole point. You are the one looking at itself from a unique perspective, which means a unique set of experiences, propensities, books you've read, all those stuff. So that's, really important. And I couldn't agree with you more about coming into the immanence. And I think they come together. And that's the idea of a unividual for me, is like, that's when the universe recognizes its oneness. And it includes the transcendent, and it also includes all the other levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the essence of it is really that sense of interconnectedness, both the felt experience of it and the understanding of it. Because if we'd had that, or once one has that, there's no way we'd be able to do the things we've done to each other and the earth if we had remembered, if we knew that we were part of it, right? And that we were connected and in relationship. So somehow, and this is, gets a little bit into the Krishnamurti stuff I've been looking at, we got into this subject-object perspective where there's a subject and there's an object, and they're not connected. And when you've got an object there and you objectify something or someone, you can basically exploit it and cause it pain without feeling that it's actually doing anything to you, even though it is, but you've forgotten the relationship between the two.
Yes. And I think the key with that is that, look, I would say that this is a really recent, I mean, small numbers of people have pioneered this for us for sure, for a long time. But this is a new phenomena. Most human cultures have had that sense of communion with their group. Human beings have been very successful as a species because of two things: immense cooperation within the group, immense competition outside the group. And that's what's been enabled them to really, and the groups that were strongest with their cooperation could be devastating for everything else. And what's happening to us is we're now being asked to step out of that. And we're doing really well at it, it seems to me. I mean, I'm a history enthusiast, I love looking at history because it just shows you how far we've come, how well we've done. It's extraordinary, I think. So it is, it's natural to feel like, oh, look, I'm the subject, here's the object. And then the revelation, the awakening, the gnosis, is when you go, oh, I'm the one looking at itself. So there's one of us looking at itself, and then you're not separate from the other person, and that's when the oneness arises. And then with the oneness, there's this agape, this unconditional loving embrace, which doesn't take, it doesn't mean you like everything, obviously, but there's there's a profound connectedness which changes, like you said, it changes perspective, and then certain behaviors just become impossible, and that's what we're trying to arrive at.
Yeah, it's what when I kind of had that, I guess, more nature-based awakening, and it was about life choices. It felt like what I called the choiceless choice. So if there was a sustainable option in terms of consumption, clothes to buy, ways of traveling, then it's the obvious thing to do, right? It's like a choiceless choice. It's where awareness moves into behavior and your consumer choices and everything else, because if indeed you deeply feel that you are the earth and that you're deeply connected to it, and anything that happens to the earth happens to you, then you're going to make all the positive kind of sustainable choices, as it were, that you can, not from and it's not from a feeling of obligation. It's just the most natural thing to do.
Well, how do you treat the people you love? You look out for them, and so there's the benign intent doesn't always work out, but I think there's just you just find there's a benign spirit that arises from that recognition.
Yeah,
towards everything.
There's something I'd like to run by you, Tim, that I've been sitting with recently around. So we're talking about the importance of this, getting back to this connectedness, right? And how
the only thing I would like to just jump in and go, I'm really not sure about this getting back to business.
Yeah.
I'm really not convinced we're getting back to something. I see a movement between a kind of, I think the whole movement of the universe and in human culture is from an unconscious oneness through a conscious individuality to a conscious oneness.
Yeah.
And
no, I'd agree. The thing pondering is, so when we went from that unconscious oneness to that individuality, why we weren't able to hold, as it were, that experience of connectedness, which was precognitive, right? It was a felt experience, which may have enabled us to develop our individuality without destroying the planet and harming so many people around us. And I just wanted to read a little quote from Ken Wilber, who both of us are familiar with, his book In Up From Eden, where he says the ego, in the necessary course of its emergence, right? So it was important for the ego to develop, had to break free of the great mother, a feat represented in the hero myths. But in its zeal to assert its independence, it not only transcended the great mother, which was desirable, it repressed the great mother, which was disastrous. It's one thing to gain freedom from nature, emotions, instinct, and environment, and it's quite another to alienate them. The Western ego did not just gain its freedom from the great mother, it severed its deep interconnectedness with her. And one may look, it's a terrible realization, in vain through the Judeo-Christian Islamic religion for any authentic trace of the higher touch of the subtle goddess herself. And that would become a perfect and terrifying comment on an entire civilization. So he's suggesting, that in our development, instead of being able to transcend that unconscious or that pre-rational sense of interconnectedness and be able to wrap it back in the West anyway, we moved away and transcended and repressed it through fear of the wild or whatever. And that's what's enabled us to, do everything that we've done, because essentially we've had a trauma of a split in the past that has created this pathology that's enabled us to create damage and pain to the planet and each other around us. And that what we're now doing is trying to not go back to, but heal that split to enable the conscious integration, conscious connectedness to come back in.
So I think there's a lot there I agree with, and then there's some that I'm a little bit skeptical of. So I think one of Ken's great contributions is this idea that each new step in the evolution of anything transcends and needs to include. But he also pointed out that nearly always, actually, individually and as cultures, we transcend and repress before we transcend and include. And I see that in myself. I don't know about you, but I look back, even right now, here I am, 61, hopefully a little bit wiser than I used to be. But I still notice, if I notice the things which really piss me off, like irrationality and spirituality really can annoy me, because I so want it to just think clearly, because it'll be so much better if it does. But why is that? because I look back on myself and I was like that at certain points in my life. I just believed stuff, and now I'm irritated because it was in me. So it's easy. And you repress something, you push it away. It's like you're sitting kids. I'm not into that anymore. But you were into that last week. Well, I'm not into it now. And that enables you to become the adolescent, and then you become a grown up. And so that journey, and I think we do that collectively. So I think that's right. So I think it's very natural. I mean, and when we come back to it, it's different. I do think we have a very romanticized idea of nature now. And we have that because it's so safe. Seeing beauty in nature often is a luxury of the safe. It fascinates me that the mountains, for instance, were seen as ugly because they were dangerous. So horrible, ugly things. Now we're beautiful because they're safe. And so it's a interest. We are living in relationship to those changes. And I don't personally feel this narrative which goes, oh, we left nature and then we did horrible things to her. I just think we tried to solve our problems, and we did pretty damn well at it. And in doing that, we created a whole load of new problems. And so it was an unconsciousness, because it wasn't necessarily we felt like she's separate and we can do things. It's like, it wasn't even like that. It was that we could develop we were finding things about the nature of nature, which we could change our situation from things that were causing us suffering, and we could create a new world. And in doing that, we've created a new world where we can actually look back, and we don't have to have this antagonistic relationship with something which is out to get us. We can actually have a different relationship. And obviously we've got to wake up and sort that out. But I don't see it as us kind of like getting at nature. I think we just do what every species has done. We just did it very, very well.
Yeah, I don't think it was conscious, like you say. But the reason I think it wasn't conscious is that it was in the shadow, which is what
it hadn't been made conscious. I mean, we hadn't arrived there yet. It wasn't that we could have been conscious. It's like I mean conscious, that we weren't consciously kind of going, oh no, I'm going to attack nature and the earth. Like you say, it happened, but why did it happen? Because it's not, if you look at, how one would normally behave if we wanted to survive in one's ecology, right? It wouldn't be by destroying the life support systems that that we depend on. But you say that, but animals do, don't they?
If it exists in the shadow, right, which can, if you've pushed something away for what it might be very good reasons at the time, like fear of the wild, needing to kind of feel safe and gain control of it and everything else, and instead of, Ken makes this distinction between differentiation, which is normal when you develop from one level to a next, and then dissociation, where you actually split off from the past and it drops into the shadow. Then you do your thing. It's like, like we do individually, you kind of find yourself behaving in a way that, like that you were talking about, the way you were thinking, behaving in ways, and we kind of go, what, why was I behaving like that? And then you have to trace it back, and you need the coach, or you need the therapist, or you need the third person, as it were, to help mirror back to you so you can see what it is that's hidden in the shadow. So I'd agree that I think it wasn't conscious because it was. But the question is now, so what needs to happen now? I think we're both ending up at the same place, which is that whether it's restoring or rediscovering or just discovering that sense of interconnectedness, with each other, with the earth, with the rest of life, and realizing that we are the earth, we are life, we are the universe, kind of trying to work this out together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to take that sense that we have in small pockets and always have had, and being able to expand it. And that's why I'm very optimistic. I mean, I see in terms of this, I mean, there's other things, of course, we could be pessimistic about, but in terms of this, I see in my own lifetime, certainly over the last period in history, this enormous expansion of connection and compassion, so that it is not uncommon for a person to genuinely care about other people they'll never meet on the other side of the planet. It's common. When we had the Iraq War, people came out to say, let's not do that across the whole world. I mean, why? In any other time, that would have been what? But not now. Or that sense that, that you're expressing so passionately, really, which is your love of nature. You're wanting to heal this I mean, this is a deep development which we can miss. And then underneath it, much smaller, but underneath it, I've seen this steady growth of people who have had this mystical oneness with the universe. So when I started talking about oneness, I don't know, 20 years ago or whatever it was, where I started going out talking, most people, when I would talk about love, they'd be like, great. If I talk about oneness or that way, or about they would see it as abstract, a bit philosophical. But now people get that it's experiential, that it's transformative because they've had the experience or they've heard of it. Or so, yeah, I think we've come a huge distance. I really do. And part of something which I find myself doing a lot is to try and counteract the pessimism and the, well, straightforward mythantropy. You know, there's a down on humanity, which is around. There's a down on the Western culture. There's a down on human beings, and we shouldn't be doing that. We should be looking at ourselves and our ancestors and going, wow, you got us from the Middle Ages to this. Wow. Now we can take it the next step because look how far we've come. And look how far we've come just in a few decades with the relationship between men and women. Racism, which has been a fantastic boon, racism, yes, it's us versus them, has been most of history. Now, in a huge number of countries, it's unacceptable. It's illegal. This is recent. This is in our lives.
Yeah,
I mean,
what you're describing is, what all the developmental traditions would call this move from egocentric to ethnocentric, then into a world-centric, right, awareness, and then ultimately into a cosmocentric awareness.
Yeah, I think it kind of works the other way around. I think we've come from a more ethnic group consciousness and individuated, and we've entered this period of individualism, which has been fantastic. So that I never have really gone, I'm English, I am, and I can see that, but it's not a big deal for me. The pigment of my skin is pretty irrelevant, as is the pigment of anyone I speak to. I don't care what their pigmentation is. It's not an issue, etc., etc. So we've come through that, and then we've individuated and realized I can think for myself. I don't have to believe what everyone else believes in my culture. I can wear weird stuff. I don't, it's not like, well, I'm this class, I must wear this hat, which it seems like most people did 100 years ago from the films, where everyone's the same. And now we're not. And then the individualism, which has been a fantastic thing, that individualism now needs to change into unividualism. And what we've seen in the last century was that the people who realized we needed to reach, there was an urge towards that collectivism, but a bit like with the spirituality, which was, reach the one by suppressing or getting rid of the individual. Culturally, what you saw with China and Russia and Korea and all that was find the collective by getting rid of the individual, which was disastrous, horrible, ugly. Because what we need to do is find the one or find the collective through the individual. We need to enhance the power of the individual. And then the individual, through discovering that they are the one, changes their relationship. And it becomes one, not of antagonistic relationship of self and other. It becomes one of connection and love. So you're still self, but it's also, you're connected.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I think it is. I mean, it's the classic kind of postmodern development is where, on the one hand, we're kind of, everybody is their own unique person, and we have to respect everybody for who they are on the one hand. But that also is what gives you the world centrism, because everybody, from the postmodern perspective, we have to respect and tolerate everybody. Even, so you get this kind of pure individualism, and at the same time, this world centric, because you bring everybody into
and then there is that jump into, well, we mentioned Ken, and he calls it integral. John Gebser's idea of that there's a place where, and this is something again where, if you're looking for that next step, which I am, as I know you are, it's like there's a sense in which I also want to combat that horrible phrase I hear, which is like, well, this is my truth. And it's like, no, that's not going to get us there. That's just going to leave you in a bubble. That's the individualism.
Yep.
We need to bring what we've got to each other in a spirit of mutual inquiry. We need to find the deepest things together. We need to be able to doubt ourselves and each other, engage to find how can we, well, like where we started this conversation, how can we bring together, if spirituality especially is going to be relevant, how the hell can we create a trans-scientific spirituality, a spirituality for today? Because what I've, at the same time as that's been happening, that movement into oneness, which is there, I've also seen, especially certainly in British culture, this growth of a kind of assumption amongst intellectually educated, astute people, who are the people that run the world, usually, that all of that's nonsense. Because really, the hard truth is, if you're kind of big enough to take it, is that the universe is a kind of a machine, or if it's not a machine, it has no meaning. You just bring meaning to it, and you're here for a short while, long enough to go, whoa, what's happening? And then you're gone. And that's it. So that's really, if you're sharp enough, that's the real truth. And I've just seen it growing and growing and growing and infecting more and more of my friends, and it's starting to encroach on me. And that was happening about, I don't know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, which made me go, well, either I have to look at this and go, am I deluded? Because I could be. Was my awakening experience, was it part of a manic depressive cycle? Was it an episode? Or is it real? Or is my experience around people dying, that's not the end? Is that just wishful thinking fantasy because I'm not intellectually robust enough to face the truth? Or is it real? And if it is real, or the nature of synchronicity, or the narrative nature of life, where you feel like, hang on, this is like a dream, this is magic, hang on, is that an all illusion? And if it's not, how the hell does that fit with this incredible body which we have now in physics, which can take a spaceship and drop it on an asteroid, or understand the quantum nature? Just like incredible knowledge. And my feeling is the problem we've got in making the next step is that spirituality is nowhere near up to the job. Nowhere near. It's still lost in a much more kind of a mythic, which is kind of lovely, but just not good enough. And that somehow we need people to have the courage to just push it hard and go, so what of this is still right? And then we need to be able to express it in a way that there's some chance that people who are really educated in this don't look at it and go, you don't know what you're talking about, do you? We have to form bridges. And that feels really important, because the culture isn't going to move on in the way you described if it's dominated by a story of what existence is, which is fundamentally pretty soul destroying. Well, totally soul destroying.
Well, totally. It just denies the existence of soul.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
It's what I find a useful distinction to be between the states of consciousness that we can achieve and the stages of development we actually work through, because people, through meditation experiences or peak experiences of some kind, people can get that experience of oneness, right? But sometimes people then believe, therefore they're enlightened, right? Whereas enlightenment is actually the hard grind of moving through these kind of stages of development to be able to get somewhere where in our everyday experience, we are experienced and therefore responding as if we were all interconnected as one, from that kind of heart compassion place, as it were. So the risk, I think, is that as our technological or rational line of development soars, in terms of its complexity, if our moral line of development does not keep track, which it's not, partly because of the failure of religions and our spirit and our spirituality in the modern day, then you end up getting highly advanced and highly impactful and potentially dangerous technology in the hands of individuals and cultures with a level of moral development or a perspective on the world that means that you can take that technology and basically use it to exploit people, the planet, anything else. And because the impact of the technology is increasing, that becomes ever more dangerous. So I'd agree that the mission is that we need to get that interior development, moving fast, so that we can actually act responsibly with the kind of technologies that we're starting to develop.
I completely agree with you, Peter. And the technology, I think, are really exciting. But like you said, if they used in the wrong way, it'd be awful. So my thing, I'm a philosopher. I don't know what I am really. I'm just a human being who wants to understand this and live it as deeply as I possibly can. That's all I am really. And so for me, it's like what I find myself looking for, my part of the puzzle, is what's the big story here? What's the thing that brings all of that into one story where you can see, oh, it's all one thing. And I think if we can shift that, that will be, you know, if we can shift that underlying paradigm, underlying understanding what existence is, and I think it's not about going back to the spirituality before. I don't personally think many of the attempts that are being made at the moment, you know, the quantum mysticism, it doesn't work, I don't think, for me. We need to find something new. And my feeling is that the key idea is this incredible thing which arose 100 years ago, which has come up implicitly in our conversation over again and again, which is that discovery that, oh, the universe isn't a thing, it's a process. We are in something which is evolving. Everything. And this, so the place where I'm looking for to hold a story that can hold everything is with a hypothesis, which we'll see if it's true, but which is everything has evolved. Everything. That's what this is. This is the realization of potentiality in ever more emergent ways, and it's happening at every moment. Every moment builds on the one before, builds on the one before, and couldn't happen without the moment before. And that's been happening, for as we know, in this universe for 14 billion years. And it's got us from hydrogen to you and me having this conversation. Wow, that's incredible. Has it stopped? No. Where's it happening mostly now? In the psyche. That's where it's going. It's happening as we speak in the psyche. With everyone listening, you know, any new idea, it's happening. So can we see that what physics has done and been so successful at is studying the first 10 billion years, the development of the physical universe, which is in a way the simplest because it's repetitive, it's foundational, and it's become very good at that. Changes when you get right down low again, of course, with the quantum area, but there's that kind of, it's got that. And then biology, we've begun to understand that much, much better. Not as well as physics, I don't think, but nevertheless, it's good. And then we get to the psyche, the thing which is actually doing the understanding. And there is a general feeling that science stops. And then that's a side effect of biology. And there's this reductionist thing whereby you bring everything down to the lowest denominator. And, you know, I was just with someone today, you know, really it's just atomic particles, or it's even quantum particles, just all doing their thing. And we're having this conversation, but that's an illusion. So we're back to this, as the human experience is an illusion again. The thing which you think matters, you know, I love my wife. It's just chemicals, Tim. You know, and if you were man enough to see it, you know, you would know that. And it's like, because that doesn't feel right to me at all. So the simple hypothesis I'm playing with is, can we see that everything which exists is part of an unfolding evolutionary process? And that means everything that spirituality is concerned with. So that the realm of the psyche or the soul is not a byproduct of anything. It's another level of reality which has emerged from from the biological level. And that level of reality is impacting. It's doing it right now. It's making my mouth move. But it's actually impacting in many, many other ways.
I just check something you said, whether I heard it properly. Are you suggesting that the soul emerged out of the physical?
Yes.
What you were proposing?
Yes.
What about, how about this? How about it's always been there, but our awareness of it has emerged, our consciousness of it?
Why I don't, you know, that's a common view, obviously. And I think it's mistaken. Or let me say this, I can't make sense of that. And I certainly can't make of it within this, what I'm exploring, which of course, you know, may turn out to be wrong, which is, can we, if everything has evolved, and if what I'm experiencing now is one thing come after the thing before, which is, can it be, so that would mean we'd have to go, where did it come from? And what I see is that everything is tending towards the more emergent, it starts with quantum possibilities. It doesn't start with the most emergent. It heads towards that. You know, it started with hydrogen. It didn't go straight into you and me having a conversation. It took 14 billion years to get to that. And it looks like, doesn't that the psyche is something which has arisen quite recently, and certainly in the way that we experience it, quite recently. So what I'm suggesting is, look, that's evolved, but let's stop seeing it. So what I'm saying to spirituality is, let go of the idea that there's this eternal realm, or it always exists and we've fallen from it and now we're in this, and instead see that that realm of the soul, which is real, I spent my life exploring it, has itself evolved, just like this incredible world of the ecology of life has evolved. The ecology of soul has evolved, because everything has. And then I'm saying to science, don't stop with biology, and don't dismiss the reality of this because you're so frightened it's going to turn into religion. This is a level of reality. The whole thing, the physics, where physics ended up is, materialism's been dead for 100 years. And what we're, the leading edge of physics for sure is that everything is made of information. So what you've got is information on a material level, turning to information on a biological level, turning to information on a soul level or a psychic level. And we're experiencing all of them now. And all of that information is interacting with all the other levels. And here it is. I listen to you, my ears pick up the frequencies. I intend to say something, my mouth moves. And it's all interacting. And I think through that, we can come to understand the narrative, synchronous magic nature of life. I think we can understand psi phenomena. I think we can understand the evolution of immortality. The evolution of the ability of the psyche to exist in that realm without the biological realm, at least for a while. So that we can actually have one woof.
Yeah. So a couple of things. And a part of it I resonate with, part of it I have questions about.
Sure.
So let me just check. I mean, the way I often explain it to people is it's like a spectrum of light. Like we can see part of the spectrum. The material realm, etc. But there's still, we accept that there is, a light beyond that we can't see. Now, in the same way, there is information, is what science is now saying. It's basically information that exists that we can't see, that are waves, right? And at some point they come into form as standing waves. They lock into a frequency that we can actually then experience in our material world. So it's gradations of information essentially going on, right? Which for me seems to fit with what you said. Let me just check that.
I think so.
Right. So increasingly subtle or gross,
No, I don't. Okay. I think there is a whole realm of information. I mean, what we have right now exists on a whole load of different levels of different types of information doing different types of things. I wouldn't necessarily see it as subtle or gross. But
okay, let me just say my definition of gross would be that which we can see and touch around us.
That's the accessible information. And then what we're studying with science is all the we can't find the laws of nature with our eyes.
This is the work, the dialogue with Brenda Dunn the other day from Princeton was talking about information flows that we can't normally pick up with our normal senses.
Exactly. We're picking them up for sure. Other ones, yes.
So, okay, if we can agree on that. Now, how about, because your perspective, as I've heard you express it so far, has been primarily evolutionary, so spinning out of things. How about the idea of involution, which is also that matter, as it were, comes out of the subtle fields, you could say? That there's you have an idea that comes in, then you enact it in the world. So things are coming into form as information, and then they come into the manifest world, and then we're also evolving out the other way, and those two processes are going on in parallel.
I see no reason to believe that. I know it's very popular. It became popular with Aurobindo. I talked about it with Ken Wilber when I had a conversation. I filmed a conversation with him. And I'm really open to it because it fits with where I was 20 years ago. Because I would have definitely said that. That's the picture I had 20 years ago. But it's happening now in terms of, look, this level of the psyche is definitely interacting with the biological right now. So that's definitely happening. But I don't see that these other levels were somehow already there. And what I see is that the psyche is made up of images from the world. It's like the world has given birth to an image of itself, which we can now manipulate as images, ideas about images, ideas about ideas, ideas about ideas about ideas, into this whole realm which we exist in of the psyche. But what seems much, much, much more elegant, using Occam's razor, the ability to cut to the simplest, is at least to try to say, can we see this? For me, it's about the nature. This is a process. What's the nature of time? Well, my experience is every new moment is new. And every new moment contains within it implicitly everything that's ever happened, because it arises from this moment, which arises from that one, which arises from that one. So here we are, implicit in our meeting is us meeting at Braunton and all the things that brought me here, us getting born, learning to speak English, the evolution of the human body, everything. So the universe, it seems to me, is that the past isn't going anywhere. The past is accumulating. There's more and more information. So there's a tendency towards emergence. So it starts with the simplest and becomes more and more and more immersion. And so that one of the ways you can say that is that the universe is learning. It's learning how to be an atom. It's learning how to be a single cell. It's learning how to be a multi-cell. It's learning how to be a human being. And as it's learning, it's setting up algorithms. It's setting up what Charles Peirce, the American, called the habits of nature, not the laws of nature, but regularities. Lee Smolin, the physicist, talks about it as the power of precedence.
That'd be like Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields?
Yes, very similar. So that you've got this, so that what you're seeing is this accumulation. So everything, I mean, that I do this is because there's a habit of it. It's a way the universe works for this. And so that you're building ever towards the more emergent. So that, you know, maybe in a group like this, I can say this, you know, for me, one of the big problems was, look, I experienced something I would call God. I experienced something which is this incredible, when I hit the oneness, it's not like just like one, it's like, whoa, this is alive and intelligent and loving. And how can that be? Because the idea of God at the beginning does not work. Because if you put God at the beginning, firstly, you've just taken a bigger mystery. You've just taken the mystery of the universe and replaced it with a bigger mystery. Where did the universe come from? It came from God. You know, where the hell did that come from? You've explained nothing. And secondly, what sort of intelligence, what sort of loving intelligence would put us through this crazy journey of such suffering and 5 mass extinctions, or 120 billion years of dinosaurs, or childbirth killing so many women for the whole of history? All of that is nuts. So my own feeling that I'm playing with this idea of, look, if it's all one process, is that the universe is evolving into God, not evolving from God. And that's why I don't see it as like the soul's already there. And these are the most emergent thing. What's the most emergent thing I can imagine? Well, it would be God, the universe conscious of itself. So maybe just like Tim started as an egg and developed into a body and then a psyche, but it started, the universe is doing that. It's developing into the most emergent thing, so that when we connect with that oneness, we are bringing into existence the universe conscious of itself as another level of emergence. So that
so whether it was there or not before, how do you deal with the kind of scientific evidence of people being able to pick up information about things happening before they do happen, or like we were discussing before, the Global Consciousness Project, stuff that registered a shift in the field of probabilities, let's say, just before the planes hit the Twin Towers. So something seems to happen in the subtle information fields before it manifests in the relative material realm.
Great question. Okay, so here's what I hope it's not. I hope it's not that it happens on the subtle and then it happens here, because if that's true, we're back to that awful deterministic, the fact that I'm saying this has already happened, or your reaction has already happened.
Kind of, it would relate to the quantum thing it's about probabilities. You're picking up the probability of something happening.
Okay, but it would still be some other. This now would not be where it's happening. And my sense is, let's try and keep with that, because that's what we actually experience. So my own thought, and this may sound a bit far out because I'm going to say it very quickly, is, look, with the arising of psyche, you've got a completely different realm. It's information on a trans-real level. It's transmaterial. It's not material information anymore. Just have a look right now. You're in it. Everyone's in it. You're in a material one of the senses, and you're in a non-material realm of imaginal information, let's call it. And things are held together differently. Like here, it's cause and effect. That's going to drop. That's going to drop. There, it's meaning and narratives. That's the connections. So what's happened, if I can just say it boldly, is I think the universe has evolved into a story. So the old spiritual insight, which is life's really a dream, it's like, no, life has become a dream. And which is why you're experiencing two levels of reality that are interacting. One, which is fluid and dreamlike and full of meaning, and one which is cause and effect and not. And they're interacting. And they interact as a whole. The whole ecology of narrative can interact with the whole ecology of biology and physics. So that what you're seeing with those phenomena is the word that I came up use is narrativity, because it feels like gravity. It feels like it's something which there's a connection with the past that repeats, a pastivity, and then there's a narrative level which is moving it around. So that what we're experiencing all the time is more like the game end of playing a computer game. It's like, yeah, go down far enough and it's ones and zeros, an operating system, but where we are, it's a game. And the experience we have of what's really meeting here is the story of Tim and the story of Peter is not something we're putting onto life. It is life. It has become a story. So what you're picking up there is that you can predict things narratively, just like you can predict things physically, because narratively we're moving in that direction. And then you come to, like with COVID, I want to be really critical of the scientific or mythic views, and it's like things we discussed between us before of like that somehow we're being punished by the earth, or it's like things like that really don't work for me. But it is in our story. It's a huge part of our narrative. So the endeavor which I see people doing with Humanity Rising to go, what does this mean in our story, becomes absolutely justified, a reality, something key to understand.
I'll leave it there for now. I think we actually have a similar, like I'm talking about subtle realms, you're talking about narrative. We could go into that a lot more deeply, but I'd like to pick up on one of the themes that's been coming up in the chat and things, which is this question of linearity of time. And this particularly came out also in the Krishnamurti and Bohm dialogues, where they make a distinction between chronological time, so they don't deny that things have evolved, over time. Chronological time on the one hand and psychological time on the other hand. So they'd say in the pre-rational, let's say, phase, our experience of reality was cyclical. We didn't experience reality as linear. In fact, the Hopis, in the structure of their language, have nothing related to past and future. It's all about inging in the present. And one of the places that's taken us in terms of psychological time is that in our mind, we find ourselves spending times, thinking about the past or worrying about the future, which is taking us out of the present, which is where we really need to be. And so in terms of our experience of time, we need to move into a more non-linear experience of time, right? Where we're not the whole time caught up in the past and the future, but where we are, like you described it in a way, feeling the past in the present, but also feeling the future, or feeling the narrative, as you might call it, in the present. So it's in the present, and at the same time, we're feeling the influence of the past and that narrative or that potential of the future. But we're not, with our rational cognitive mind, spending the whole time thinking, okay, well, how are we going to plan out the next 5 years? Or wasn't it a shame I did that yesterday? That kind of thing. How would you respond to that?
Yes, I kind of know what you're saying. There's a few things. One, I want to pick you up if I may, and I know why you're using the word, and I don't mean this as a criticism of it at all, because I completely get it, but just because this is being watched by a lot of other people, I always get uncomfortable when we use this word rational in that way, because it feels like we need to be rational now more than ever. And rationality is not reductionism. Rationality is not overthinking. Rationality isn't linked to a particular philosophy. Rationality, which is a huge advance in human evolution, is having a good reason. It's that. And then, of course, you can be rational about what is and isn't a good reason. And so it feels really important we rescue that word, that we can go, look, we need that. So thinking about things in a rational way will really help you. That doesn't rule out the fact that all thoughts come from where? They're all linked, like Einstein said, they come, every new thought comes from the unknown. And then you approach it by going, does it make sense? And there's another one, and does it make sense? And so it seems to me that what we're really talking about there, about this being in the moment, we're always in the moment. Where else could we possibly be? So then it becomes about, well, what we mean is we're overthinking the future, perhaps, or overthinking the past. I mean, my feeling is really helpful to think about the past and the present and the future. You can't not have the past. Just to use words is to use the past. I can't, if it wasn't being processed by all of the passivity of my psyche, I would just be seeing colored blobs. But I'm not, I'm seeing Peter. Well, that's the past. If it wasn't for the past, you wouldn't be able to hear the sentence because you just hear syllables, or you wouldn't even hear them. So what do we mean here, really? And there's a kind of infatuation with the now, as if it's something separate. But surely the now is the flow of time. That's what it is. Yeah. So what we need to do is engage with that flow of time in the most healthy and productive way. So if you're getting caught up in thinking around repetitive thoughts, which a lot of people get, or worry, worry is a good thing, but not worrying all the time. That's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. So then it becomes about a healthy use of the mind, and using all of it. So you use the rational, hold it together. How does the meaning work? And then you also have the intuition, which is constantly throwing up new possibilities, some of which are brilliant and some of which are rubbish, and sifting that through.
Yeah, nice. And just to bring it back around in a way to where we started, Bohm makes a useful distinction between how the rational mind, I use it in the sense of the ability to discern distinctions between things, right? Can create, he describes, and we create a reality of parts, which is, as long as we remember they're connected, is healthy. But what often happens is we forget the relationship between them, and then the part becomes a fragment. So when the rational mind, in that sense, gets obsessed with fragments rather than parts, then we end up being in a disconnected, let's say, space. And that's when things start to kind of happen in a way that,
yeah, I mean, there's two things it feels like there, Peter, to me, which is that this is where the word rationality has become associated with reductionism. And reductionism is about, if you want to understand the whole, break it into parts. And it's worked really, really well for working out how a thing works. It's completely useless for working out what a thing is and how it works as a whole. And Bohm was, a groundbreaker in the 80s at getting us to think holistically. And it was completely right. I mean, completely right. But they both play a role, but thinking holistically is the key. But he did that by being rational. He did that by taking his rationality and going, we need to now approach it holistically. That's the rational thing to do. And then people like me, young man, read it and went, oh yeah, I'm convinced. That makes sense. So I think it's become associated with this breaking things up into pieces, but it's not that. And science, that's where it feels like what I'm looking for with the trans-scientific spirituality is to make it emergent, not reductionist. So the key insight is the greater whole is more. It's just as real. So that my love for my wife is a greater reality than the chemicals in my body, which are also there, which is why my body can feel my love for my wife. But the love is a more, and this me communicating with you isn't some mechanical thing and I'm in an illusion. That mechanical nature has become this. It's become a story. It's become a dream. It's given rise to images. And so you end up, what I love about this whole vision is you end up in a world which is real. So this world we've got here, my humanity, it's not a spiritual illusion to get rid of, but neither is it a scientific one. It's real. This really exists. This really is the one in relation to itself at this level of emergence. This is what it's got to. This incredible, tangible, beautiful, colored, tactile reality. And of course, all the other levels.
Beautiful. That's a good place to leave it. A reminder that this is life still working it out, right? I mean, we are life exploring.
We are. And that's the humbling.
Celebrate.
That's why, we started off, when you started off this conversation, you asked me where it began for me. And it began with the mystery. And the mystery's never gone. That doesn't go. It's still just as mysterious as ever. It just gets richer, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tim, for your time. I just want to make sure that people can follow up with you afterwards if they want. Here you can see a link to Tim's site. He's also building an online community here, so there's a link there. There's a couple of programs that might be interesting for people that I'm involved with. We're doing one on how do you apply all of this to organizational development, for example. So Organization by Natural Design, which is coming up in October. And then we're going to be doing a monthly series of reflections, these kind of philosophical reflections. First one starts on the 6th of October, I think it is. So feel free to join us for those as well if you want, and do check out more of Tim's work on his site and the community there. So thank you very much, Tim.
It's been a delight. I knew it would be. And thanks to everyone who listened in.
And time just flies, doesn't it?
It doesn't.
So back to you, Sabinia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Tim and Peter. And I agree, time just flies. This is like a conversation we could sit around a campfire and, just continue to really, really talk and dive into all of these existential and life affirming conversations. And just a few, there was so much that was conveyed, but just a few words that came to mind, the individuals to unilevels, the unity and diversity, the narrativity, chronicle time versus psychological time, and of course, a 3D, 5D, cause and effect, meaning and narrative, where the 5D is where we can utilize our imagination and where we can also manifest in the parallel universe. And I think during all this conversation, I also realized, there's so much healing that needs to be done. And because the more we also talk, especially from a spiritual perspective and a science perspective, we sort of see that it boils down to, the core of us as humans and also the collective traumas and all of that we've sort of gathered together, and that healing process is also part of that educational process that we're now also talking about, that we need to evolve ourselves also through dialogue, but also through a new ways of learning, and really tap into our own skills and tap into this consensus of unity. And also when you were talking at the end, when you talked about that we really are all explorers of life, and that's why it's so amazing that we can have all these dialogues and listen to all of you amazing experts who have thought of this in so many different dimensions. And it sort of reminds me of a book that for me is like the quintessence of a narrative of life, and it's The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince. And I always remember this one sentence because he was an explorer, of course, of grown-ups and humans, and he says, "Now here is my secret, a very simple secret. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." So it sort of encapsulates that it all comes from love, and it starts within. Once again, thank you so much, Tim and Matt, for having a really interesting conversations. There were loads of questions as well. So hopefully somehow, Tim, you can maybe answer. There were so many queries and questions. So we'll see if we can sort of facilitate that. But I hand over the word to Jim.
Thank you, Sabina. Thank you, Peter and Tim. My goodness gracious, you have pulled off the rare accomplishment of making philosophy interesting. And I appreciate the energetic nature of your intelligence, Tim. it warmed my heart. It reminded me of my old Cambridge days, as sitting around in our doctoral seminars and just engaging dynamically on some of these rarefied issues. Of course, in this case, with Humanity Rising having deep import, on how we understand life itself. And we're convening a panel in about a month with Irvin Laszlo and Gene Houston and Jude Curran and some others on this real question that really frames what the two of you have talked about. And that's, what's the true nature of the universe? And because understanding that informs everything. And I'm working very hard behind the scenes to get Nassim Haramein, the physicist, to come on Humanity Rising, because I think he's really cracked some fundamental codes in developing a unified field theory where everything can be understood based on his physics equations as an integral, living, intelligent, information feedback loop organism. If we were a small, infinitesimally teeny little part, but participating in the whole. And the two of you just kind of opened up this subject so masterfully. So thank you very, very much. And then tomorrow, we are going to turn to Hunter Lovins. If you know Hunter, she's been around for many decades. She's one of the founders of natural capitalism. She worked with Amory Lovins for years on how to develop business and economics within the context of biomimicry and natural systems and constraints. And tomorrow, Hunter is convening a panel on the issue of regenerative economics and how the business model already under dynamic change can continue to reshape itself as the world realizes that nature is not the enemy. It's not an inert object under our feet to be exploited. It's actually a living organism. In fact, it's our mother, in a literal sense of that term. And if that's the given, how does business need to reshape itself? That's the subject for tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. Same time, same station, starting at 5 o'clock p.m. Central European time here on Zoom. Humanity Rising will be back for day 102. Thank you. Bye for now.